I secretly dated Thaddeus for 3 years, and I wanted to surprise him and make our relationship public. That day, I quietly arrived at his house, holding flowers, and hid in the closet, planning to propose to him. To my surprise, I saw him come home with a woman. It was Serafina, Thaddeus's first love. "Thaddeus, haven't you cleared things up with Aurelia yet? You can't really be thinking of marrying her, right?" "No way. I only love you. I'm with Aurelia just for you." Thaddeus held Serafina and said that if he hadn't dragged her down all these years, she would have found her biological parents long ago. At that point, whether or not you are a biological child of the Lucian family would be exposed. Lucian has been searching for his sister all these years. If I hadn't gotten a blood sample from Aurelia and deceived Lucian, how could you have become the young lady of the Lucian family? I listened to their conversation and was instantly stunned. It turned out that the love Thaddeus spoke of was all a lie. At that moment, my heart completely sank. I hid in the closet, watching Thaddeus and Serafina together. After they finished, they hurried out for a meal, not even bothering to clean up. At that moment, I finally came out of the closet, my face drenched in tears. I don't know how I made it back home. For years I've been trying to find my family. I have told Thaddeus many times that finding my family is my greatest regret. He always gently comforted me, telling me that one day I would find them. Little did I know, he had already known where my family was. To help Serafina pretend to be a wealthy heiress, he even deceived me into giving a blood sample. At this moment, all I felt for Thaddeus was hatred. I lay on the bed crying, and eventually fell asleep. I was just too tired. When I woke up, I found that Thaddeus had come at some point. He was busy in the kitchen, and when he saw me awake, he smiled and told me dinner was ready. I looked at the man in front of me, who was gazing at me gently. That tenderness in his eyes left me feeling a bit bewildered. If I hadn't overheard his conversation with Serafina at his home, I really wouldn't believe he could act so differently. "Aurelia, I originally planned to travel with you, but now it seems it might fall through." Thaddeus told me this while I was eating. It was at this moment I remembered he did mention wanting to travel with me a few days ago. We had already booked the tickets, but now he says he can't go. "Then let's not go," I said coldly. As for Thaddeus, I no longer felt the same enthusiasm as before. Hearing me say this, he was momentarily stunned. In the past, every time he said he couldn't go, I would agree but always felt sad. This cold reaction today was the first time he saw it. He nervously grabbed my hand and said, "Aurelia, the company is a bit busy lately. Once things settle down, I'll go with you. How about you go play by yourself instead?" He said this while smiling at me, saying it would be a shame to not go since the tickets are already booked. I didn't reply, just looked at Thaddeus. After a while, I nodded, as a sign of agreement. Seeing my agreement, he clearly sighed in relief. After dinner, Thaddeus said he had something to deal with at the company and left. I watched his figure leave, feeling a bit bitter inside. I understood that he was going to find Serafina. However, I don't quite understand why Thaddeus wants me to leave. I hadn't paid much attention before, but today his behavior made it very clear to me. He never intended to take me with him from the start. He just wanted to trick me into leaving. Thinking of this, I dialed Isadora's number. Thaddeus doesn't know that I have a close friend who is Lucian's secretary. Over the years, we've had little opportunity to meet due to work. Our relationship is still very good. "Aurelia, what brings you to me?" Isadora asked curiously. "Your company has an event next week, right?" I casually asked. "Aurelia, did you find out too?" On the other end of the line, Isadora whispered, "Let me tell you, Lucian has found his biological sister, and there will be a press conference next week to announce this news." As soon as I heard, I understood. Thaddeus was afraid I would attend the press conference, so he pretended to go on a trip to distract me. I thought for a moment and asked, "Have you seen Lucian's sister?" "I've seen her twice. Her name is Serafina. I've met that girl, and she really doesn't look like our Lucian at all." My friend on the other end of the phone laughed and said, "If Lucian hadn't found his sister, I would have doubted you were his sister. You look a lot like Lucian." When I heard this, I was taken aback for a moment, then said, "Can you arrange for me to meet Lucian?" "Why?" Isadora on the other end of the phone was momentarily stunned and quickly asked, "Just to meet once?" "I want to talk to him." After considering it for a moment, I replied, "It's best to keep it a secret." Isadora thought for a while and asked, are you free tonight? Lucian is entertaining guests at the hotel. I'll drive him home later. I quickly agreed and then hurriedly left. Following the address Isadora gave me, I found Lucian's place and waited at the door. Before long, Isadora's car arrived. She opened the car door for me and said to the back seat, "Lucian, this is my best friend. She wants to see you." When Isadora said this, she appeared a bit nervous. She knew this could affect her job, but she still chose to do it. Upon hearing this, Lucian slightly opened his previously half-closed eyes and looked up at me for a moment. I noticed the shock in his eyes. "Who are you?" Lucian asked me eagerly. "My name is Aurelia." I looked at Lucian and said, "I am your sister." Lucian squinted and coldly stared at me, saying, "Do you know what you're saying? I have already found my sister, and we even did a paternity test." At this moment, Lucian's face was as cold as ice. He said, "Do you know the consequences of deceiving me?" I looked directly at Lucian and said, "Serafina deceived you. She took my blood sample and did the paternity test. If you don't believe me, let's do it right now." As soon as I finished speaking, Lucian coldly looked at me and then turned to Isadora, saying, "Drive to the hospital." After being taken to the hospital by Lucian, several people were waiting for news after having their blood drawn for testing. During the wait, Lucian's expression was complex as he stared intently at me. I could feel that my appearance had raised his doubts. We looked too much alike. When I saw Lucian, I realized he was my biological brother. Shortly after, a doctor hurried over to Lucian and me, holding a report. He handed the report to Lucian, who glanced at it and his expression changed immediately. I quickly leaned in to take a look. The results were in. Lucian and I were actually siblings. "Serafina is lying to you." Isadora looked shocked and immediately grabbed my hand, saying, "Aurelia, what's going on?" Lucian looked up at me, a hint of anger on his face. Months ago, Serafina came to him with a report, claiming to be his biological sister. At first, he didn't really believe it. Later, Serafina gave him a vial of blood and told him to get it tested himself. It was only after the results came back that he believed her. But he didn't expect that it was all a lie. At that moment, his gaze fixed on me. Just as he was about to speak, the phone rang urgently. When Lucian took out his phone, I saw that the caller ID displayed Serafina's name. "Brother, I'm not coming back tonight." After the call was connected, both Lucian and I heard Serafina's voice. Lucian responded briefly, hung up the phone, and then said to me that he would definitely get to the bottom of this. "All right." I nodded and said that I would set off on my trip tonight and would contact him once he found out more. After saying that, I turned to leave, but Lucian stopped me. "You're going alone? That's too unsafe. I'll send a bodyguard to accompany you." I looked at Lucian. His expression was still somewhat serious, but the concern in his eyes remained unchanged. I understood that he trusted me. He just wanted to confirm again. "There's no need. I've been doing this alone for years." I smiled slightly at Lucian and then turned to leave. He watched me, a hint of guilt on his face. "I'm sorry, that incident was truly an accident." He recounted the events from that year in detail. "I was secretly taken away by the family's nanny, and since then, there has been no news. My parents searched for me all these years, even until their deaths." As I listened to Lucian's words, I felt warmth in my heart. At least I understood that I was not a child without anyone caring for me. "Keep this card." Lucian handed me a bank card, his tone serious, saying, "You'll need money when you go out." "I don't need it. I have money." I pushed Lucian's hand away and said, "Give it to me once you're sure." As Isadora and I left, Lucian was still staring blankly at the appraisal report in his hand. I had Isadora take me home, and she was especially excited on the way. "Aurelia, are you really Lucian's sister?" Isadora pulled me and said, "You have no idea. After Serafina and Lucian confirmed their relationship, she's been causing chaos at the company, even making it lose a lot of money. Many people in the company are really annoyed with her, but no one dares to say anything because she's Lucian's sister." Isadora was venting about the trouble Serafina caused at the company while being happy for me. After dropping me off at home, she asked where I planned to go. I said I wanted to find a place to calm down. Once I got home, I organized my things and called the landlord to cancel my lease. Then, I quickly grabbed my luggage and headed to the airport. I bought the fastest flight. It didn't matter where I was going anymore. Right before getting on the plane, I sent Thaddeus a breakup text. As soon as I landed, I found that Thaddeus had called me many times. "Aurelia, What on earth do you want? Why do you want to divorce me? Listening to Thaddeus's voicemail, I smiled but didn't respond, and directly blocked him. After that, I found a hotel with excellent security online and checked in directly. Once I checked in and got to my room, I lay down and went to sleep. I was just too tired that day. In a daze, I received a call from an unknown number. Aurelia, what do you mean? As soon as the call connected, Thaddeus's voice was full of questions. I went to your place, and the landlord said you moved out. Why did you break up with me? Listening to Thaddeus's questioning on the phone, I said, Thaddeus, I know about you and Serafina. On the other end of the line, Thaddeus's voice immediately stopped. At that moment, all I could hear was his hurried breathing. Aurelia, there's nothing going on between me and Serafina. You must have misunderstood. Hearing his panicked voice, I smiled and didn't respond. Aurelia, have you gone on a trip? I'm about to come find you. He didn't hear my voice and immediately asked me. I didn't answer. Instead, I hung up and blocked the number. I know he thought I would travel according to the ticket he bought for me, but actually, I didn't go at all. The next morning, as soon as I woke up, I received a call from Isadora. Isadora said, Aurelia, Lucian sent Serafina to the hospital. She might have to take a paternity test again. I couldn't help but laugh when I heard that. Last time, Serafina used my blood sample, and now that I'm no longer there, her lie can't continue. Isadora also told me that Serafina said she had something to deal with and would be back in 2 days, so during this time, Serafina would definitely find a way to cope. I understood that Isadora meant Serafina would find a way to contact me for a blood sample. Sure enough, right after I finished my call with Isadora, I received a call from Thaddeus. He had changed to a new number. Aurelia, hurry back here. As soon as the call connected, I heard Thaddeus speaking. Thaddeus, we are no longer together, so don't come looking for me, I said coldly. But on the other end of the line, Thaddeus wouldn't give up. Aurelia, I'm thinking of you. The last time I took your blood sample to the hospital, the doctor said you needed to be checked again. Hurry up. Hearing Thaddeus's clumsy excuse, I couldn't help but laugh. It's fine, I'll go to the hospital myself. You don't need to worry. After I finished speaking, I prepared to hang up the phone. Aurelia, come back quickly, Thaddeus shouted angrily on the other end of the line. After hanging up, I continued to go to sleep. I knew that Thaddeus was very anxious right now. At the same time, I called Isadora, and she told me Lucian had already started the investigation. Especially since Serafina dared not come to the hospital, it made Lucian more certain that I was his sister. After talking to Isadora, I hung up the phone and continued to stay in the hotel. Thaddeus called me many times, but I didn't answer. Until one day, the hotel front desk called me and said someone was looking for me downstairs. I asked who it was, and the front desk said it was Thaddeus. I told them I didn't know this person and asked them to get rid of him. I didn't expect that just after I hung up the phone, there would be a knock at the door. At that moment, I felt extremely anxious. I quickly called Isadora to tell her that Thaddeus had found me and was right outside the hotel where I was staying. At the same time, I also called the front desk to ask them to send security over. Just after hanging up, I heard Thaddeus's voice outside. Aurelia, come out quickly, I know you're in there. You need to come back with me. Outside, Thaddeus's voice was urgent, but I coldly replied, Thaddeus, we've broken up. Please leave. Through the peephole, I saw Thaddeus and some people behind him, including Serafina. As soon as Serafina heard this, she immediately panicked and said to the others, Quick, break down the door. Upon hearing this, the group immediately charged at the hotel door. Seeing this, I quickly locked the door and rapidly dialed the police. A few big men took turns slamming against my room door, and before long, the door was smashed open. Seeing Serafina and Thaddeus rush in made me even more uneasy. Thaddeus, what exactly do you want? I stared at Thaddeus and asked him coldly. He looked at me with a complex expression and said, Aurelia, I'm worried about you. Let's go back and get you to the hospital. After he finished speaking, he tried to pull me away. Just then, the hotel security arrived. I saw them and immediately shouted, They want to take me away. I've already called the police. Upon hearing this, the security immediately restrained Thaddeus and the others. Thaddeus was still saying that I was his girlfriend, that we had broken up because I was angry, and he wanted to take me back. But obviously, this reason didn't hold up. After the security arrived, I finally breathed a sigh of relief. Before long, the police also came, and after understanding the situation, they took Thaddeus, Serafina, and me to the police station. Thaddeus kept staring at me and said, "Aurelia, have you had enough of this? I'm just trying to take you back to see a doctor. You're sick." "Thaddeus, I know whether I'm sick or not. You're just taking me back for Serafina's sake, right?" I looked at Thaddeus coldly and said directly. Thaddeus wanted to say something more, but I turned my head directly, not wanting to listen anymore. After we were taken to the police station, Thaddeus still insisted on his claims, so I told the police directly that I wasn't sick. The police also asked Thaddeus to provide evidence of my illness, but he couldn't produce anything at all. Just when I was talking to the police, I suddenly saw Lucian rushing in with Isadora. As soon as he entered the police station and saw me, he immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Lucian was about to talk to me when, in the next moment, Serafina rushed over. "Brother, you're here!" Serafina dashed into Lucian's arms and said urgently, "Brother, take me out of here. I just came with a friend to find his girlfriend, and I didn't expect to be misunderstood." She then looked at me and continued, "Brother, it's this person. My friend is really good to her, but she doesn't appreciate it at all and even reported us." Lucian stared at Serafina and then coldly said, "You're going to the hospital with me." "What?" Serafina was taken aback and said, "Brother, didn't you already say I was your sister?" She looked at Thaddeus in a panic. However, Thaddeus was being watched by several police officers and couldn't say a word. Serafina wanted to find an excuse, but it was completely ineffective. He was taken away by Lucian's men. I stayed at the police station, watching Thaddeus. "Aurelia, quickly tell them this is a misunderstanding. We are going to the hospital right now," Thaddeus said to me anxiously. I shook my head coldly. "Thaddeus, are you afraid that the truth about Serafina not being Lucian's sister will be exposed?" Hearing what I said, Thaddeus's expression immediately changed. He looked at me, appearing very surprised. I said lightly, "Thaddeus, Serafina is not Lucian's sister. I am, right?" My words made Thaddeus's face turn even uglier, and his expression completely changed. Seeing Thaddeus's reaction, I couldn't help but sneer. I turned to the police officer next to me and said, "Officer, this person wants to take me away. He intends to harm me." Upon hearing this, the police's expression immediately changed. At the same time, I told him that once Serafina and Lucian return, you will be implicated in the fraud case. As soon as I finished speaking, Thaddeus appeared somewhat flustered. He looked at me and said anxiously, "No, Aurelia, you misunderstood." I looked at Thaddeus, shook my head, and knew in my heart that whatever he said was not true. I didn't want to hear any more of his lies. At this moment, I was sitting in the police station, waiting for news from Lucian. Before long, Lucian returned with Serafina. Serafina was brought to the police station by several bodyguards, her face pale as she pleaded with Lucian, "Brother, I really am your sister. It must be Aurelia who did something." After saying this, she pointed at me. After hearing these words, Lucian let out a cold laugh. At this point, she still refused to admit it. I felt somewhat helpless, not expecting Serafina to still be this stubborn. In the police station, Lucian directly pushed Serafina to the ground and coldly stared at her. "Do you know how many years I've searched for my sister? Because of you, my sister and I almost couldn't recognize each other." At that moment, Lucian's face was extremely cold, glaring fiercely at Thaddeus and Serafina. Then, he turned to me, held my hand tightly, and said, "Aurelia, you are my sister." Looking at me, his eyes were full of guilt. Lucian said that the nanny was dismissed because she did something inappropriate while working for the Lucian family. Unexpectedly, the nanny secretly took me away. When Mom and Dad went to look for me, they realized I had long been missing, and the nanny had disappeared too. He took out a photo and handed it to me. Seeing myself in the photo with the nanny behind me, I was stunned. I recognized this person. She is Thaddeus's mother. I pointed at the woman in the photo and said loudly. At that moment, I finally understood that Thaddeus knew I was Lucian's sister all along. Upon hearing this, Lucian suddenly turned to those police officers. "Officers, this is a case of organized fraud. The other party used my sister to deceive me. Moreover, this woman took at least millions from me and caused my company to suffer huge losses. Now, I demand severe punishment. As soon as Lucian finished speaking, the police immediately sprang into action. The matter involving Thaddeus's mother relates to human trafficking, and with the fraud committed by Thaddeus and Serafina, this family is almost all going to prison. Lucian pulled me, his face full of guilt. Sister, I have been searching for you all these years, offering rewards, and even gave him some money, he said, pointing at Thaddeus. I looked at Thaddeus, and at that moment he looked at me with pleading eyes. But how could I possibly let Thaddeus go? I smiled at Lucian. Brother, didn't I come back? Luckily, heaven blessed me by allowing me to overhear his conversation with Serafina. I looked at Thaddeus and said with a smile. Upon hearing my conversation with Lucian, Thaddeus's face turned pale. He kept pleading with me, hoping that I could spare him. However, how could I let him escape this ordeal? The whole family, including Thaddeus's mother, are the ones who have hurt me. If it weren't for them, I might have lived a good life. So, I can never forgive them. As Lucian and I left the police station, I heard Thaddeus begging for mercy, along with Serafina's voice. Even now, Serafina still claims to be Lucian's biological sister. Days later, the police informed us that Thaddeus's mother had been arrested. After Thaddeus's mother was arrested, she awaited her trial. On that day, Lucian took me and publicly announced that he had found his sister. I am the daughter of the Lucian family and Lucian's only sister. Many were surprised that although Lucian had previously introduced Serafina to numerous people, now, Lucian's sister had changed. However, after learning the details, many were left in shock. No one expected that Serafina was actually a fake heiress and was imprisoned for fraud. And I am the true heiress. Amidst the celebrations of the city's wealthy, Lucian handed me a document. He said that our parents felt particularly guilty for abandoning me and left me a dowry before they passed away. It's half of the Lucian family's shares. He let me into the company, and under Lucian's guidance, I quickly took over several businesses. That day, Lucian told me that the verdict for Thaddeus had come out. Thaddeus was involved in fraud, with a significant amount of money at stake, and coupled with his and Serafina's obvious intent to forcibly take me out of the hotel, he was ultimately sentenced to 10 years. As for Thaddeus's mother, she was also sentenced to 10 years, which at her age basically means spending the latter half of her life in prison. Serafina couldn't accept the reality that she couldn't become a rich young lady, and as a result, she completely lost control. She was sent to a psychiatric hospital. I heard that on her first day in the hospital, she was already thinking about escaping, but ended up getting beaten badly by a group of patients. Every day, she lies in bed shouting, claiming to be the young lady of the Lucian family. Hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh. Serafina is truly crazy, even deceiving herself. Lucian looked at me and said, "It's all done, our family is finally reunited. Aurelia, your name was originally Aurelia of the Lucian family. From now on, let's use this name." I happily agreed. After all, this is the name my parents left for me. Years later, I took over many businesses of the Lucian family and became a well-known strong woman in the city. As for Lucian, ever since he married Isadora, he hasn't come to the company, leaving everything to me while he travels around with Isadora, not even leaving a trace behind. One day, I received a call from the detention center. They told me that Thaddeus was dying and wanted to see me before he passed away. I initially wanted to refuse, but in the end, I went to see him. Seeing Thaddeus, who had become nothing but skin and bones, I was stunned. I never imagined he would end up like this. At that moment, looking at me, his eyes were particularly excited. "Aurelia, you finally came to see me. Have you forgiven me?" He stared at me excitedly, his voice trembling a bit. "Aurelia, I'm sorry. I didn't want it to be this way either. In fact, I love you, but I know that as long as you return to the Lucian family, we will have no hope. That's why I wanted Serafina to replace you, only then can you stay by my side forever." I couldn't help but sneer at Thaddeus's words. "Aurelia, will you forgive me?" His eyes looked at me filled with anticipation. I shook my head and said, "Thaddeus, it's already impossible between us. I will not forgive you either. From now on, we don't need to see each other again." After saying this, seeing the disappointment in Thaddeus's eyes, I stood up and turned to leave. Days later, the prison informed me that Thaddeus had passed away. Before he died, he kept calling my name. I told them that I had nothing to do with Thaddeus. They told me that Thaddeus's mother died of a cerebral hemorrhage after learning of his death. They couldn't even properly bury the bodies. In the end, they had to hastily cremate them without any arrangements. Their story has ended, while my life is still full of excitement.